Hi, I'm Dylan Taylor, Chairman and CEO of Voyager Space Holdings.
I'm Ken Eppins, founder and CEO of Orbit Guardians.
Hi, I'm Raphael Rotkin, founder of E2MC Space Ventures.
And I listen to the Cold Star Project.
And I listen to the Cold Star Project.
And I listen to the Cold Star Project.
This show is for entertainment purposes only and is not what is termed professional advice. The Cold Star Project is proudly presented by the Operational Excellence Society. Cold Star Tech is a supporter of the OPEX Society, and Jason Kanigan is a member of its board of advisors. Talk with us at Cold Star Tech to find out what we can achieve together with your Lean Six Sigma or Operational Excellence programs. And check out opexsociety.org to learn more. So we often have technical experts on this show. This time I wanted a business perspective and from outside North America, although our guest today was born in the United States. He moved to New Zealand ultimately, and that is where he has set up his consulting firm, Rotoiti. His name is Nick Borroz. Nick does have a master's in international economics from Johns Hopkins and also a doctorate in international business from the University of Auckland. So he is not a total newbie to international relations. Anyway, I'm really enjoying talking to him and learning about his perspective on the space industry. Nick, welcome.
So you have a really interesting background, Nick. You started out in like Oregon and went through the Peace Corps and got a PhD in international business. I was like, wow, this is a lot. How the heck did you end up in New Zealand? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
So yeah, the New Zealand. The reason I came to New Zealand was basically for a PhD. So I was working in DC at a business intelligence firm, and I was enjoying it, but sort of wanting a sabbatical maybe from consulting. And so I looked at PhD programs, and I was intent on doing a UK style as opposed to US style one, because I didn't want to spend 7 years doing it. I wanted more like 3 or 4 years. So I reached out to a bunch of potential supervisors, and there were 4 in the UK, 1 here. And the main difference here compared to the UK ones was I modified my proposal so that I could get money. So I was, basically fully funded to do a PhD. So I asked my wife, then girlfriend, if she'd be down and to go to New Zealand, and she said sure if we could bring the dog. And we came to New Zealand, and it's been great.
Fantastic. I am curious about this Peace Corps experience. Tell us a little bit about that.
Peace Corps was amazing. Peace Corps was, one of the most life-defining things I've done so far. It was after college. I applied at the end of college, but basically I didn't know what I was going to do after college, and everyone kept saying, Nick, you should do Peace Corps, Peace Corps, Peace Corps. And I didn't want to because I felt an urge to resist what everyone told me I should be doing, but I ended up just applying for it on sort of not on a whim, but not with a bunch of investment in the possibility. And then I got in, and they sent me to Thailand, rural Thailand, for where I lived for 2 years, first in Lopburi and then Kanchanaburi, so central Thailand. And it was amazing. I lived with the host family for 2 years. I worked in 2 schools in the middle of nowhere. And actually the PhD in a way was trying to return to Thailand. So my PhD compared New Zealand and Singapore, the way the governments of New Zealand and Singapore support firms going into Thailand. So it was an excuse for me to go back to Thailand for a year. It's just, I really recommend actually to Americans, to Americans of all ages, because they like to get diversity. And it tends to be dominated by college students, or just people who came out of college. But I really recommend it as something to do if you don't have a plan about what you ought to be doing, because it just opens your eyes up to so much. Before I went to Thailand, I knew nothing about Thailand. And the Thailand that I knew is not the Thailand that 99 out of 100 Americans know when they go to Bangkok and Phuket. It was, hanging out with farmers basically for 2 years, and you learn the language. You just really immerse yourself in another culture. And it was wonderful.
Awesome. I think that's got to be an incredible experience. So you ended up in the space industry.
Yes.
How? Tell us about your company and what you ended up doing.
So so when I started the PhD, I knew I wanted to go back into consulting. But I had the idea that I wanted to sort of be my own consultant.
Hmm.
So whereas before in DC, my job was when a project came up, I would kind of connect the dots between projects and experts in our network. I was kind of the network coordinator of subcontractors. So, you know, if something came up in Nigerian oil, then I would find all the, you know, kind of West African / oil, like, you know, energy people and come up with a list of potential people to help us with the project. And I wanted to be one of the experts that someone like me would be reaching out to kind of connect the dots. Because yeah, it seemed more interesting to build up expertise rather than just process other people's expertise. So, but I did not have an industry or a geography idea about like what I wanted to specialize in. In my old job, I was all over the place, like many different industries, many different geographies. And so really, I just chose space on a whim. I was in New Zealand. New Zealand has amazing outdoors spots, and I was at Lake Rotoiti, which is on the northern bit of the South Island. And I was looking up at the stars, totally sober, I might add, thinking about how amazing the stars are and thinking, man, space would be pretty cool. And I just kind of went for it. And the basic my thought process was, okay, I don't have any space experience, so I started a website called Filling Space, which lasted about 3 years. It's still online, but it's really not active anymore. It stopped being active earlier this year. But every week I would feature an interview with a space expert. And then after I did that for a while, then I reached out to potential clients saying, hey, I'm a consultant, I have Filling Space, can I help you with space stuff? And for free. I started by saying for free, pro bono, and then yes. And so I developed a kind of a portfolio of work experience. And then people started to know who I was, and basically paid projects started coming in. So yeah, that was the process of how I entered in. And now it's obviously business development is always kind of, you always have to keep it going. It's like, is the term like a spin wheel? Is it? You got to like keep it going in advance of when you need it to be producing for you. But by being out and about, people sort of approach me for projects, which is nice.
So I guess tell us a little bit about what services you ended up offering,
Sure.
and just as importantly, what you don't do.
Yes. Okay. So basically, I do 3 types of services, and they kind of lead one into the other. So market research is helping clients understand how what they do relates to or compares to what else is happening in the market. So either in terms of competitors or suppliers or customers or whatever, or bigger trends. The next bit, so that's market research. Next is strategic advisory, which is, okay, now that we know what's happening kind of in the market context and how what you're doing fits in, what should you be doing? So that will be like, should we go here? Should we go there? Should we be pursuing this kind of business or that sort of business, something like that? Or, what should we be concerned about in terms of like our compliance program or something like that? How do we set up a compliance program? And then the final bit would be business development, which is kind of me. Once we have a strategy, then I will help implement the strategy. And they don't necessarily occur sequentially like that, but in my mind, they do feed one into the other. And the common theme with all of the projects, whichever service they're in, is I'm not selling truth. So I'm not going to come out and say like, here is 100% the answer for you. What I do is I have a lot of questions in the beginning with the client about like, okay, what are you trying to do? What are some useful sources of information? How should I approach the sources? How should I present the findings to you? And we do that back and forth, lots of back and forth. And then the findings are a process, they're a result of that process. So it's kind of like I will tell you, these are what people with this sort of profile say. This is what people with that sort of profile say. And so, yeah, it's kind of a more nuanced, I'm not like a strategic consultant where I'll be like, okay, if you do A, B, C, D, E, you will be, you know, Elon Musk. I'm just kind of constantly saying, okay, this is what various people are saying, but caveating it according to what we know about their interests, and stuff like that. And yeah, what do I not do? I used to have there are two things I don't do sales and I don't do lobbying because you cannot, my whole shtick is I talk usually to people, sometimes others, there are open sources as well, but oftentimes I'm talking to people. I need to be kind of like a neutral arbiter, you know, if I'm helping a client and I talk to you to help me answer the question for the client, I can't be your buddy. I can't be like invested in Cold Star Technologies. Like, so I need to be kind of like a neutral person to say like, okay, well, Jason said this, but we know this about Jason's interests. So obviously we can kind of, you know, assess what he said according to that. You know, like a very good example is like, does the price per kilogram, is that the most important thing for launch services? If you're talking to someone whose entire business rests on lowering the price per kilogram and they say yes, you're like, okay, obviously they're invested in saying that. Whereas if there's someone else who has a different proposition, you know, maybe their launch service is about, you know, higher price per kilogram, but more specificity in terms of orbital, you know, insertion point, then they'll say, oh no, price per kilogram isn't that important. And you need to be able to know that about their interests to assess what they're saying. And you need, in order to assess what they're saying according to their known interests in kind of like an honest way, you cannot be representing them or tied to them. So my whole shtick is kind of like a neutral collector of and assessor of information. So I don't lobby, I don't sell on behalf of clients. And then I'll be quite discreet with kind of like an airlock between the clients and the sources of information, so that I'm basically not an agent of anyone. I tend not to do quantitative analysis because it's just not my strong suit. I don't do forecasting because forecasting I think is lame. No one knows what's going to happen. I can tell you what people think will happen, and I can tell you what quantitative analysts think will happen, but I will not do the quantitative analysis and the forecasting myself.
Okay. Can we zoom in a little bit, segment geography, you know, what areas that you're serving? Is it just New Zealand space companies, for example?
Yeah, so geographically, it tends to be New Zealand located or interested, but increasingly I'm trying to branch out to Australia and then Asia Pacific more generally. My goal is to kind of be like a nexus between Oceania, Asia Pacific, and North America, because I am a person from the United States located in New Zealand. In terms of sector, and by sector I mean public, private, or academia, I'm quite agnostic. I'm also agnostic in terms of segment, meaning where in the value chain in the space industry the projects are. And the reason for that is in my projects, usually I'll be weaving together diverse perspectives on something to help a client gain better understanding about what they ought to be doing. And it's important to get outside the silo. You know, that's basically a recurring issue in space, is everyone's trapped in a silo. So, you know, the person making the synthetic aperture radar sensor is a genius, but they don't understand financing. Or, you know, the person who understands the entire process for securing spectrum authorization doesn't understand the ITAR or something like that. So I try and have as broad a range in terms of segments, so like upstream, midstream, downstream, and sector, public, private, academic, so that I can be kind of constantly weaving together different views on things. All
right, Nick, tell us a little bit about some of the common difficulties that you find people in the space industry running into.
Cool, yeah. So generally, as I said before, it kind of has to do with that siloing issue. So people are very locked into the thing that they're obsessed about, you know. And in space, in my experience, which is limited, but in my experience, a significant majority of people doing space stuff are engineers, essentially, or aspiring engineers. They're kind of STEM type people.
Yeah.
And they're obsessed with playing with their Legos and making cool things out of Legos, but they have zero interest in the world's use for their little Lego creations. And anything, any attempt to do business development or strategizing or compliance or financing is like a post hoc justification to play with Legos, basically. So the common shortcomings, I think, are thinking outside the Lego silo. Like, what do non-space nerds, non-STEMmy space nerds think about what you're doing? So every quarter, I publish a brief on an issue that is kind of, I see as an obstacle to doing business in the space industry. And then what I'll do is every quarter, I'll talk with a bunch of smart people on the topic, kind of like I do for my projects, but it's much briefer. I'll talk with a bunch of smart people, and then I'll write a 3-page brief about this issue, and then I'll share it with all the people I know. And that does help with business development as well, and it helps me learn about things. So those briefs, the topics they have covered are issues that I think are common obstacles to doing business. So let's see. The most recent one was securing spectrum authorization. This is, I'm sure some people listening to this know this. I'm not an expert in anything, by the way. That's my whole shtick. I'm not an expert. I just talk to experts. So I'm sure there are people who know this much better than me listening. But securing spectrum authorization is a giant pain in the butt. You have to navigate national and international bureaucracies. Like, multi-year expensive legal, political subject matter expertise required in order to make the thing communicate, like to get the data down. So no matter how cool the satellite is, you need the spectrum authorization. That seems to be something people oftentimes underestimate. Reputational issues. So you need reputation. That was another topic that I focused on. Reputational issues, like, what is your reputation? Are you associated with something that a certain client doesn't like? If I Google you, what's your profile look like? And this is kind of from my due diligence background. Everyone does a Google check on everyone before they get involved with them. And space firms really need to think about reputational issues. Are they associated with military activity? Are they, is some kind of catastrophe the first thing that comes up in Google with them? Are they behind the curve in terms of having green propulsion systems or whatever? And all of that matters depending on who the people are that you're trying to forge relationships with. So those are two issues: spectrum authorization, reputational issues. Another big one, I think, is venture capital. So you need to have financial expertise to think about your financial options. I'm not a financial expert, but that just kind of makes sense. Like, where are you getting your financing from? And why does it make sense given what you want to do? And I think there's a pretty big issue, especially with startups, about thinking they need venture capital as opposed to other sources of financing, and then not knowing how to speak to venture capitalists to explain why what they're doing would be of interest to venture capitalists, especially venture capitalists who think about space. It might be easy to dupe a non-space focused VC person, but a space focused VC person, you need to make a convincing case. Communications is kind of related to the reputations thing. You need a communication strategy. And this is a thing that engineers playing with Legos don't think about, but you need to think about, okay, how does this Lego thing that you made connect to the rest of the world? A communication strategy. There's a reason every firm above a certain size has a communications person. It matters. You have limited bandwidth in terms of how you communicate yourself and what you're doing to the rest of the world. You need to choose which audiences matter. You need to understand what they care about, and you need to craft a communication strategy accordingly. So those are 4 things: securing spectrum authorization, reputational issues, venture capital, communications errors. And yeah, there are others. One big one is ITAR compliance. That to me, that's one of the biggest ones, ITAR. It's like dual use technologies, and governments have all sorts of things, not just ITAR, but other governments have all sorts of rules in place about if you do this, you can't do that. It's like, okay, so if your plan is to sell to the United States and you have some relationship with an entity from a government that the United States isn't a big fan of, well, good luck selling to the US. That's another big one.
Okay. Nick, should people be going to your website to get these reports, or do they sign up somewhere?
I don't have like an automated distribution list. I just add people to my list, and then I send a little email. But yeah, feel free to check out my site to see all the previous briefs. It's just rotoiti.space, or yeah, feel free to contact me. Okay.
And I guess let's run through this then. Can New Zealand and Australian firms work together on space projects with US companies? What barriers or enablers do you see to that?
Yes, they can. I mean, of any countries in the world, they're probably the best positioned after like maybe Canada and the UK. If you think about ITAR stuff and the Five Eyes. What's the sort of complementarity of New Zealand and Australia for in terms of like what they can do that US firms can't? I think probably the benefit of New Zealand and maybe Australia, there's the crying baby again, is it's a small market here. So it's easy to prove yourself with an idea, like Rocket Lab. Rocket Lab came up with an idea and started to make a name for itself as the up and coming launch services provider in New Zealand, to the point that it was then able to go over to the States and become the behemoth that it is today. So it's kind of, they often describe New Zealand this way, not in the space industry, but in many places. It's kind of like a little sandbox where it's easier to kind of toughen up and prove yourself before you then expand to a large market. And I imagine there's also probably a lot less regulatory. New Zealand is one of the easiest places to do business in the world, and Singapore usually vying for the top spot in terms of ease of doing business. So it's probably kind of a nice place to go or to start, build up an idea, get a little bit of a track record, and then go to the States. Whereas in the States, there's tons of different people all trying different things. It's difficult to cut your teeth in the States and survive.
All right, that's where I am. All right.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, how would you like people to reach out to you and Rotoiti?
Honestly, I just email, just nick@rotoiti.space would be the preferred way to reach out. You could also shoot me a message on LinkedIn. And yeah, those would be the preferred ways to reach out to me.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your perspective. Thanks for doing this.
Sure thing. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks for joining Nick and I for this discussion. This is Jason Kanigan, the founder of Cold Start Tech. We are the systems and process installers for space and defense contractors. If you're struggling with your business development strategy, come and talk to us. Maybe an innovation workshop is the idea for you. Go and find out more. Go to coldstartech.com and look at our innovative capture page. And if you like what you see and you want to talk more, book a call. It's very easy to. You could just pick a time from my schedule at the bottom of the page there. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.